Just imagine you've been given the most important assignment of your life, commissioned by God Himself to rebuild His house. You start with passion, the foundation is laid, and then everything stops. For over a decade, the job site sits in total silence. Every day you walk past that unfinished slab of rock, a constant reminder of defeat, opposition, and perhaps your own complacency. You become focused on your own house instead of God's house. We've all been there in that silent decade where a dream, a ministry, or a relationship feels stalled by enemies or exhaustion. But today we're looking at Ezra chapter 6 to see how God can use the most unlikely people, even pagan kings, to jumpstart his plan. Because when God decides it's time to restore worship, no amount of opposition can stand in his way. We pick up the story with a man named Tattenai, a local governor who was basically a high-level bureaucrat. He sees the Jews working again on the temple in Jerusalem and asks for their building permit. The Jews point back to a decree from King Cyrus. Now, here is where it gets interesting. King Darius investigates, he finds Cyrus's original decree and doesn't just say proceed, he issues a new decree that would make any project manager's jaw drop. First, he commands the opposition to stay away. He further decrees that any man who interferes will be impaled by a beam torn from his own house. Second, he funds the project. The cost was to be paid in full out of the royal treasury, using the taxes from the very region where the opposition lived. Third, he provides the supplies: bulls, rams, lambs, wheat, salt, wine, and oil. Everything needed for worship was delivered every single day without fail. Well, what is our takeaway from all this? God is sovereign over the hearts of the most powerful people on earth. If he could use pagan kings like Cyrus and Darius to protect and provide for his people, he can certainly handle the obstacles in your life today. When the temple was finally finished, the response wasn't just a sigh of relief, it was an explosion of joy. The Jews celebrated the dedication of the house of God with joy, offered sacrifices, and appointed priests. But here's a sobering reminder. If you compared these offerings to the thousands of animals Solomon sacrificed at the dedication of the first temple, this was a fraction of that size. But does God care about the size? No. The sacrifice pleasing to God is a humble and broken heart. Like the widow's mite that Jesus mentioned in Mark chapter 12, these offerings demonstrated total devotion. Well, the Jews also celebrated the Passover. This was a restorative event because for decades without a temple, they couldn't properly observe this feast. They were recalling how God saved them from Egypt while celebrating how he just saved them from exile. Think about this. True joy isn't artificial or a fake smile. It comes from remembering God's faithfulness in the past to fuel your worship in the present. For us today, we don't build stone temples or sacrifice bulls. Well, why not? Because the book of Hebrews tells us those things were just a copy and shadow of the reality found in Jesus. Jesus is the final perfect sacrifice. He is the reason we can have joy unspeakable, because he freed us from a bondage much worse than exile, the bondage of sin and death. God's faithfulness is ultimately revealed in his provision of his Son. The temple was built so the people could see God's rule in their lives. Today, we see that rule. So, how do we respond to this? We don't just want to be hearers of the word, we want to be doers of the word. Take a few minutes this week to recall and write down how God has been a faithful deliverer in your own life. Then encourage someone by sharing how God provided for you in an unexpected way. You never know who is currently sitting in their own silent decade and needs to hear that God is still at work. Remember, God is faithful. He keeps his word, and he is worthy of your joyful celebration. Thank you for joining with me today, and God bless.